Welcome to Sessions this week. It's another Thursday. We're here live from Shaper HQ in San Francisco. Myself, Noah, joined by my colleague, Mr. Sam, over here. And today we are going to talk about resin pours. Backlit resin pour sign is what we're going to look at today. And this is going to be kind of a fun one for us because we actually are not really the experts on resin pours. We certainly have our expertise on lots of things shop related and origin related and fabrication related, but this is definitely a place where we like to tinker, but we wouldn't consider ourselves the experts. So I wanted to just kind of kick it off with that. It's a little bit of a different vibe for than we normally get up to in sessions, and we're just kind of experimenting and having fun today, and we want to encourage you guys to do that. Get active, leave comments in the chat. I think we might have Jess Crow, who is a real live resin expert, in the chat today, and she hopefully will be able to chime in and maybe put us right when we misstep. And we're going to be doing some stuff live today, some cuts, some resin pours. The technique that we're looking at is going to be really fun. So I don't know, buckle in and welcome back to a fairly normal-looking session. We're a little more freed up. Both Sam and I are lucky to be vaccinated human beings, hence the distance between one another here. So in case anyone was worried, we are feeling a little safer here today and being nearby one another. So that's great. Makes life a little easier. Hopefully quality of the session will be a little bit improved. Anyway, Sam, let's get into it.
Awesome. Welcome, everyone. Good to have you on board. Yeah, everyone's pointed out the sign in the background here, which Jake made. This is an immaculate sort of rendition of the resin pour. We're going to be using the same technique here today, and we'll walk you through some of the considerations, the techniques, and we're hoping to get into sort of more troubleshooting rather than like, here's the perfect outcome, go and do perfect signs. It'll be more looking at the types of things that can crop up and how to resolve them. So we encourage you in the spirit of learning, in the spirit of sessions, to get in on the chat, contribute. If you've got suggestions for alternative products or resources that would be worth looking at, be sure to share them with all your friends here. So yeah, we'll get right into this. So first up, we've got this here, see from the front, is basically what we're going to be creating. So if you can see that, maybe from the above view would be better. Yeah, goose. So that's where we cut from and where we pour from, which will be the back of the file, which means the outcome looks like this. So what we're going to do is cut not the whole way through the stock. We're not going to be doing it in ply. We're doing it in a nice piece of cherry. So we're going to cut, say, about 1/2 inch into the stock and then pour into that. So the back will be sealed by the wood. And then we're going to flip it over and sand the back to reveal the resin. So it's a great way to get detail and be able to shine a light through them from the back.
Well, yeah, and as well, in the sign and on this project as well, you can see, the entirety of the origin profile is actually floating inside of the resin. And so the big thing that this technique and process sort of makes easy is these islands that you can create both with text and designs that can be actually quite difficult to deal with for a completely backlightable through cut sign. Right, it doesn't matter if you're not trying to shine a light through it. You can leave things connected, not cut all the way through. But in this case, the only other option really would be to cut all the way through and kind of figure out a way to arrange these parts while you're doing the resin pour. So we're just kind of eliminating that step by cutting partially, and then we'll see a little bit later on over at the thickness sander. Hopefully, this reveal will work out as we'd hoped. But we've got one example of this guy. Sam's working on a second. But this has been cut and poured and cured up over the last couple of days, and we'll be running it through the thickness sander to reveal the front face. So that'll be fun.
And we'll kick off with just some of the key components and materials we'll be using as we go through it, so that you get prepped for your final pour. So the big one we're using is an epoxy resin. This is a 2-part resin. You can buy in equal portions of the hardener and the resin. It's a tap plastic one called Ultra Glow. So this is actually designed for pouring on the tops of like kind of bar counters and things to get that sort of super gloss finish. But we've found it to be a great viscosity for this type of thing and getting light to come through it. So this is Jake's recommended go-to. By all means, chime in on the chat. I'm sure there's a lot of other alternatives that might be better. So one of the key things there is the viscosity of this. We're trying to get it down into little gaps, and I'll talk more about how we have selected the thicknesses of our lines and all that sort of thing as we've sort of developed our ideas. But if this was a thicker resin, some of the I think polyesters and the sort of doming resins, they are more prone to trapping bubbles, and B, they don't flow into tiny little gaps as well as some of the casting or surface coat type resins. So we may be sort of abusing this particular resin, but follow along.
It's working.
Makes sense. Makes sense. And then we dash down to, we've got a little Douglas and Sturgis down the road. By the way, Ted will be linking to these products if they're too small to see. So these are little resin dyes. They just drop in there and change the colors. You'll notice we sort of messing around with the colored buttons here. Then we've got a white one. We'll get into okay, cool. The white one, oh yeah, good point. How legible is that, anyone? Okay, yeah, so this is a little opaque one to make it more translucent rather than straight up transparent as Jake's one was there. Then you need measuring cups. It's mostly just proportions, so it doesn't matter if it's in metric or ounces. That'll work fine because you're just doing a 1-to-1 ratio most of the time. But it is great to have the little measurements on the side just so that you can be confident of your ratios. And some small ones if you're doing different colors. Mixing sticks. Actually, we'll cut away just to the top view now, Jake. Goose. And you'll see here's the other, array of things we're going to use. We're going to have to be very careful in the bottom of our cuts because we're sanding from the back. If there's any fuzz or anything remaining at the bottom of our pockets and whatnot, we're going to want to sort of sand that off with this little fuzz guy. Sorry, Goose, I got you jumping back and forward. And tweezers, X-Acto blade, just to make sure the bottom of that is really smooth. Because if you leave any material on that base, you're going to have to sand a lot further to get through it. But we'll talk a bit more about that as we go along. Dead blow hammer, that'll help us. There's going to be a phase where we're trying to get bubbles out of all this. And we'll talk about the different causes of bubbles as we go along. Shellac. Actually, we'll talk about one of the causes of bubbles right now. So this is spray-on shellac. It's good for bonding to most materials. You can do that other view if you want, Goose. Maybe the top view. It's great in that most materials bond to it. It dries pretty clear if you don't build it up too much. And this is to seal our grain. So this we're cutting into cherry, which is actually pretty forgiving. In fact, the example one, we didn't put the shellac down. And in this one, we won't either because it takes 15 minutes to dry. And none of you want to sit around for 15 minutes waiting for us to
dry. You can kind of show what the effect of not doing the shellac is on this guy if you get in close. So this is just plywood, so quite a bit, birch core plywood, so quite a bit more, porous than the cherry that we're working with here today. And you can see it sort of starts to get dark right at the edges of all of those pockets. And that's actually where the resin has soaked into the plywood itself.
And we'll look on the back here. You might be able to see. I poured this flush with the top, so a good indicator if there is something going wrong with the porosity of your wood is that it will start to drop as it seeps into all those pores. So we've got another one. No need to show it, but we have another one that we did shellac, and it remained flush with the top surface as it set up. So all the bubbles came out, but it didn't slump. You didn't see that little sort of meniscus shape there. We'll bring it up. This one will bring up some other interesting things to discuss. So we'll do the top view for this one, Goose. So you can see this one's super opaque. So we actually used a powder, and we weren't cautious enough. Yeah, it was this Douglas and Sturgis titanium white powder. It was just a tiny little scoop. Like, what would you say, Noah?
Like it was a gram. I think we measured it out.
Yeah.
For two ounces, I think.
Yeah. So there's 2 ounces of resin and just 1 gram of that white. And this set basically like a solid white, way too opaque. We're never going to get it. We're never going to get light to pass through that. So that was a good sort of warning that we need to adjust our approach. So we'll be just doing 1 tiny little drop of this for our one, in the hope that we can get that translucent, but yeah, able to let light pass through. Now, what's interesting here is we might have to hold it up to this other camera. Can you zoom into the front one there? Yeah, if we can see here, we were
see, huh?
Yeah, we were planning on 1/16 inch lines. So you can see here, I'll hold up a 1/4 inch cutter. So that's a quarter. We actually settled on 1/8 of an inch because when we went to pour our resin into these tiny little slots, it was really slow going and really difficult to get it to go into that finer detail. So with that in mind, when you're designing your project, it's a good idea to consider, what scale is the end result, and then what cutters are you going to use. You'll see here, I've got the 1/8 inch installed, I think. I'll get one behind me. So yeah, we bumped it up from 1/16 to 1/8, and maybe this front view again, sorry Goose. And you'll see that enabled us to get a lot more resin to like flow freely into this slot, but also you'll notice it lets a lot more light through. If you've got very thick or thickish material, say 1/2 inch, and a very thin channel cut, getting light to pass through, that's actually very difficult. And we'll talk about some of the alternatives you have to solve that later on. But yeah, this one, you see the shellac there. If we were to sand this back, you'd notice it would sand dead flush with the top rather than slumping into it. Also, obviously MDF is not going to be absorbing as much as live grains.
Well, it honestly might absorb more, depending.
Yeah,
it's
good
quite
point.
porous.
Yeah,
yeah. But the shellac is the
secret
reason for the season there.
Yeah,
yeah.
Okay, Goose will cut to the my screen here now, assuming that's still running. Magic. So I'm now in Illustrator. So I've got my file here ready to go. Over here, you can see I've done a bunch of things that are vaguely interesting, hopefully interesting to this crowd. We'll take a look at them now. So firstly, I've made my my background elements, the main perimeter is kind of a thicker line here. So I'm going to view it as an outline, and hopefully we can see that. Yep, that is. We could have done that and just used an online cut with a 1/4 inch cutter. But I actually wanted to be able to use offsets or whatever to tune this one to be the exact right thickness I wanted it. I wanted it to be thicker than the other ones. But B, I wanted to be able to do a finish pass on this one just to make sure it was dead straight, because this is going to be the most obvious cut from a distance. So if we view it back as a preview, you'll see what that one looks like. Now, these other elements, I'll hide that one again, and look at these guys. So this is all the lines. These are online cuts. So this is not going to be an inside cut. So I literally follow along the center of this one, the same as I'm going to engrave. And what I've done here is I've told each one of these lines that it has a thickness, which is the stroke, that is 0.0625 inches wide. So this is kind of simulating what Origin is going to get us with the with a 1/16 inch cutter. And then if you look down here, I've gone from like hard edges. I'll actually do it to this one because we're not going to use this file because this is the 1/16 inch one. So you'll see there's the end cap can either be rounded over, and that's going to mimic the way your cutter will actually behave, or I can say just a cap. I'll zoom in on the screen so that you can see what I'm talking about. So this is just a great way of doing a gut check before you send your file to origin. So we're going to look at the stroke really close and see that's the round cap, and then we've also got rounded corners. So it won't really show up here because there are none, they're all curved. But if you click these two and leave the line centered, you will get a pretty good simulation of what origin's going to cut, or yeah, an exact representation of what origin is going to cut. So the added benefit there is, what you see in your icon should match what you're actually cutting. And you'll notice, if I go view, outline, you'll notice there's a lot of things like I've finished this center line cut, inside of this. There's a little offset there.
Oh, that's cool.
So it happens to line up because I simulated the stroke and placed it appropriately.
Okay. Everyone pay attention here. This is some strong Sam juju that's going on here.
Yeah, and there's lots of that sort of stuff. If we just turn them on and off, you'll see how it all blends in sort of seamlessly. So this is a good way of just getting tuning this stuff up to cut exactly as you anticipate. It's pretty effective, and turned out to be quite fun to cut actually as a result of going in there and paying attention to all that. Okay, so then I actually changed it and did that as 1/8 inch cuts. So you'll see here all the, and I've encoded them to be gray, so it's cutting on the line. This is an inside cut. Sorry, the outer perimeter there is an inside cut. So that means I can fit my cutter within there and do a offset, and then we're going to pocket up here for the screen. So if we cut over to the overhead view, I've just saved that file then to Shaper Hub. That's immediately available here to cut, and we'll look at that same file. So with the overhead view, you'll see I've kind of taken care of a couple of the slow boring parts, some pockets, and we've gone down. I think this is approximately 3/4 of an inch deep, pretty close to that. You'll notice I've got it double side taped down.
Half an inch, right?
I've cut 1/2 inch deep, but the stock is 3/4 of an inch deep.
Yeah, right.
So we're going to then come through from the back and either plane or put it through
that's probably a little bit. That's more just on us. We prepped this stock and then we decided to use the stock 1/8 inch cutter, right?
Yeah, actually, we don't have the really long one.
I can go snag that.
Yeah, that'd be great. So here's the we were talking about designing with your cutter in mind. So our cutting flutes are limited to 1/2 inch here. So I literally cannot cut this deeper than 1/2 inch. There are alternatives, like this is a super long 1/8 inch cutter. I think it's over or about an inch or beyond, which that works okay for things like let's say MDF or sort of modeling foams. But once you're into hardwoods and things, this is pushing your luck in terms of stability. This is going to be very wobbly, and you'll see, you might be able to not quite see the little buttons and things. There's fine details here that if I have a cutter that's chattering, I'm going to break them out. So it's safer to play to your strengths, get a stubbier cutter, don't cut as deep, and you'll get much better outcomes.
But especially if you're going to use a shellac, it's okay to leave more just like 1/8 of an inch skin on the bottom. Obviously, the more that you leave on the bottom, the more that you've got to turn into sawdust in order to reveal the other side. So in this case, we've already gotten close on our one we're going to demo today, but we, having to get rid of a 1/4 inch of material doesn't make a lot of sense. So you can leave it more in the 1/8 inch or below territory, most especially if it's sealed up.
Right, so we've talked about line weights, depths, the stock. There's probably one more just prep thing before we get into cutting, is the distance or the kind of chamber you need behind it to diffuse the light. So what's interesting with Jake's one, he's got one big continuous LED panel in behind here.
It is quite deep though. I mean,
yeah,
it's a couple of inches.
Yeah, so that panel is like 2 inches deep, but he wasn't really limited by well, here's the elements we're using. Ted will send out a link to this. If we can do the top view, or maybe the front view would be better, Jake. Goose. Yeah. So this is a little strip of like RGB LEDs, and if we hit the on button, it comes with a remote, and you can change colors, you can change all manner of things. Yeah, so it's pretty blown out. But these are, to my eye down here, changing all sorts of
Seems like they can be any color but white.
extraordinary colors. But we need to diffuse them. So one suggestion, if it's, is that reading? Okay, so yeah, this is just opaque acrylic or something. And if I hold it hard up against this, we get very distinct hot spots. But you'll notice if I just move it away, like, what's that, half an inch, it starts to diffuse and become one big continuous area light. We got another example of that. So you do have to build in some space behind your panel if you're going to use these distinct light sources. This is another sort of example of that. It's a little, maybe yeah, this one will be good. So, oh yeah, it's totally blown out. Yeah, so that to me here looks like distinct little hotspots, but it comes with a little diffuser that makes it look exactly the same, probably to your eye on the video. But that's a lot more diffuse. So they used, another couple of half an inch or more to do that, and would recommend you do the same.
So we can definitely, I think, I don't know if we have the link to the diffuse panel, but those are pretty available. But the kind of downside to them is that you have to design around the panel size rather than letting you dictate what the project size is that you want. And so that's the advantage of these type of lights, is that they're just adhesive backed. You can stick them in wherever. But because of that, we wanted to build a case for this that's actually quite a bit deeper. So this is probably more in the territory of about 3.5 inches, which is not quite twice as deep as Jake's case. And that means that we can get the lights quite far back, and hopefully build in some amount of diffusion in between.
So yeah, we'd put a panel of that translucent acrylic in there, say half an inch from the front. That'll diffuse these hot individual light sources, and you won't get those really hot patches all over your result. Keep in mind the perceived intensity of the light drops a bit when that happens, but your thing won't look as patchy and blemished. There's another couple of light sources here, but we should just get into cutting really. This is one that I had laying around that looks pretty interesting. It's a silicon, very bendy silicon kind of a light strip. So you could cut a channel. Well, that blows that out. Yeah, so you can cut a channel of this.
Awesome.
And bend it. You could do your whole light, or your whole sign with this, almost the way they did neon tube bending and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's options. Ted will link you to that, and right, we'll get into cutting. So I'm going to go around.
I told you this was going to be a free-flowing, just random project with Sam and Noah today, and we're really coming.
Getting into it.
We're getting into it. We're making good on that promise.
Right. So if you can switch to my origin screen. There we go. So now what we're doing is we're looking at that exact same file we were just looking at in Illustrator, and this is how it looks on Origin. So you can see I've scanned on my workspace, I've made a grid. Interestingly, this stock doesn't match the dimensions of my file. My file is like 12 inches across, and the stock's like 14.5. So I created a custom grid, and I just typed in 14.5 divided by 2, and that gets me a center point that is proportional to my actual file. So then I've got the same, all around these bottom 3 edges gap there, and I can place my file centered on that and know that it's nicely aligned and going to be centered. Now here's the big one. I inverted this file in software. Actually, if we can cut to my screen here. So hopefully that's visible. Reverse your artwork. This is common with all sorts of stamps, lino stuff. Just before you start cutting, just think, do I need to reverse my artwork? Like, is it transferring to something, or is it going to be flipped when I view it? Yeah, it's a trap that will catch you out. So, you know, it will read like this because we're going to be sanding from the back, but we need to cut it reversed. And then, yeah, that's about it for that little concept. Back to origin. That's a common one that catches pretty much everyone out. I'm pretty sure it's caught me out more than once. So if there's one thing you can take away from this, just remember.
Reverse your artwork. Never happens to any of us.
Sorry, it never happens to me.
Never happens to Sam. Sam's amazing.
Okay, so I'm doing a Z-touch. I've got the 1/8" cutter in here, and I'm going to approach this like cutting out a large object. Now you'll see my 1/8" cutter fits in there nicely. I'm going to use a slightly different technique here that will hopefully be quite interesting. Noah will be able to talk us through it, but the idea is, instead of, you'll notice my cutter removes over half the material. So I don't need to cut both sides to the same depth. I can plunge a little deeper and sort of stagger my way down there. So rather than just blindly doing, 1/8", 1/4" on both sides identically, because we're clearing out more than half. So yeah, I'll just get into this and Noah will talk you through what's going along. Rough and cast pass to begin with, just a small offset, and we'll start on the inside.
Okay. So as Sam's working his way through this, I'm going to keep you guys entertained. So yeah, to kind of talk a little more deeply about what Sam's getting after there with the making this outside profile of the whole of Origin is actually a contained inside cut. So it's one big shape. And Sam, you can see the setting up there on the top left-hand side of the screen is inside cut. And so that means that Sam will have the opportunity to go around both sides independently. And so what he's talking about there is sort of, he's going to go at 1/8 of an inch on this side, and then as soon as he makes it around the other side, he is going to go a little bit deeper, and he's able to stagger his cuts. One, that's going to get him through the work a little bit more quickly, and two, it's going to keep the cutter loaded up appropriately. So one thing that is really important is keeping your end mill loaded up, making cuts with only a little bit of material can actually be somewhat problematic. If you're just doing little finishing passes where you're shaving a tiny amount of material off, that's okay. But if it grows to be a little thicker, one thing that can happen, especially with narrower bits, is the bit can actually start to deflect off of that surface if it's not appropriately loaded. And so that is kind of what Sam's getting after here, where he's able to make those adjustments and sort of stair-step his way down. You can also see he's got a 0.01 offset set up, so that's setting his cut. You can see both sides, there's a little narrow band that isn't blue away from the profile. That's the offset he's applied. And he's going to be able to come in and just kind of skim that away in a last pass. So you can see we've made it all the way around. He's going to, or already did, set his depth down to 1/4 inch. So we're halfway to our final depth target. He's just going to keep going around. For those of you actually that aren't familiar with Origin, that are joining us today, that don't know what the heck is going on here, Origin is a handheld CNC router. So what that means is Sam is doing the coarse motion. Origin's doing the fine correction all the time. So if you watch that little white dot in the center of the circle, we call the big circle there the corrective range. That's the area that Origin can move the cutter inside of, and it's moving it independently from you. And the dot represents the cutting tool. And so as long as Sam gets the path that he's cutting inside of that big white circle, Origin's actually going to do the rest. It's going to keep track of what Sam's cutting and make sure that it's super spot-on accurate, while Sam just sort of roughly follows that path. So that's Origin in a nutshell. If you're interested in learning more about Origin and what it can do and how it works, you should check out more of our sessions. We've down below on the sessions page there's a button for the archive, or if you're on YouTube, check out our archive playlist. Tons of sessions about Origin. You can also check out shapertools.com If you're super interested in learning something specific that you don't see, reach out to us. Send us a message, hello@shapertools.com, and we have got folks standing by to chat with you, get nerdy about woodworking, answer your questions. So please do get in touch if you have questions for us. And speaking of questions, looks like we do have a couple coming in here that are worth checking out while we're working. So again, Sam's working in a 3/4 inch piece of material right now, and that is honestly a little bit too thick for what we're doing, because Sam is only able to cut a 1/2 inch deep with the stock 1/8 inch diameter cutter that comes with Origin. The total length of cut on that cutter is a max of a 1/2 inch, and it's hard to actually fudge that one like you can kind of fudge with the 1/4 inch cutter, because the 1/8 inch cutter is actually ground from a 1/4 inch shank, which means that it sort of tapers up to a 1/4 of an inch after that kind of total length of cut. So you'd start to run into the bit, non-cutting parts of the bit, pretty aggressively if you were to try to go to deeper than a 1/2 inch. So in this particular case, I would recommend a stock if you're going with an 1/8 inch cutter that's stock with the included 1/8 inch cutter with Origin. I'd recommend a stock thickness of probably maybe 5/8, just a little bit beyond, so that you've got a good skin, an 1/8 of an inch skin on the bottom that you can easily peel away, and you're not sitting at the thickness sander for 20 minutes waiting for the whole thing to go through. So if we were to do this over again, prep the stock for this session over again, it would definitely be a little thinner than 3/4 of an inch. And we'll get into kind of the resin stuff here in a second, but I did want to mention and thank Jess Crow for joining us today, and throw your questions her way. I believe Maker Epoxy is a product that she developed with Total Boat, and she'll be able to answer some more questions on the epoxy front. We're definitely, as I mentioned earlier, not the resin experts here. We bring the Origin knowledge and the fabrication knowledge, but resin is something that we are definitely relatively just tinkering novices at. We're having fun. I hope you guys are having fun as well. So it looks like Sam is at his final depth here, and he's set his offset to 0. Cool thing about Origin is that you can adjust that offset on the fly. So what Sam's kind of demonstrating here is a roughing and then finishing pass strategy, machining strategy. What that means is he's able to remove the majority of material with a slight buffer. So he's giving himself a little bit of a buffer away from the final profile that he's drawn in Illustrator. And that's so that he can come through, and what he's doing right now and just finishing up is that final pass. And that means there's very little material to remove, and it allows you to get a really, really, really crisp edge. If you're doing a rough pass first to remove the majority of the material, then just skimming a tiny amount of material off the edges of the profile, that's really going to give you the most optimal results.
I'll give you a couple of little
hang on. I was going to say,
yep. Get us on the mic. I'll give you a couple of little tips there you might have seen if you're paying close attention. You would have noticed every time I passed into an area that had been cut previously, so you would have seen the cut history, this blue area, showing here you see everything's 1/2 inch deep, so you'll see it all illuminated blue. But every time I crossed from an area that had been cut shallower than that, so say I was coming along this line and approaching this edge, I'm going to have a lot of resistance, a lot of force stopping me pushing through, and then suddenly there's going to be none. Like I'm now in air for the remainder of that cut. So as I transition into the blue, I hold down auto mode and I let Origin basically push itself across that threshold. Then I pick up again with the new sort of force I'm resisting. You'll just get used to that sort of behavior. The same applies for corner rounding. And worth noting, I've slowed down the auto speed to 9. I mean, you could go slightly less if you wanted. It depends how aggressive you want to be or how comfortable you feel operating Origin. So this is the linear feed rate. I'll just do an air cut here to show you what I mean. So I've turned on auto lock mode. So this is moving at 9 inches per minute. We're just following above here. And that's what that auto setting is doing. We can set it way higher. So we'll go 35 for some breakneck. So you'll notice that's like super aggressive. I can barely keep up, and it rounds corners quite aggressively, and your cut quality will be diminished as a result. That's not the case if I don't do auto mode, so a single click instead of a double click. You'll notice Origin only ever tries to get to the center of my my cut corrective range.
Sort of following your lead on feed rate.
So you'll see it, tracking the line, but not going any farther, versus auto mode, which zips along. So I'll put that back to 9 so we don't do any harm. And then, the same will apply with these cuts I'm about to do now. Now, these are the ones we pointed out where we simulated them in Illustrator as 1/8-inch cuts. So these ones, rather than making them a inside cut and like expanding the line to make kind of a sort of a hot dog shape, I've just left it as an online cut, and I'm just going to plunge down deeper till I get to my appropriate depth. So we'll do that now, and then we'll get resin pouring. How are we looking for time, Noah?
We're doing well.
Cool. So double check before you hit plunge. I've air cut this one, so it's a very light color. But we're going to do 1/8, quarter, follow along.
Okay, so while Sam's going there, just talk you through a little bit about, sorry, I'm making my way back over here away from Sam so that you're not hearing him in my microphone. So we're going to talk a little bit about kind of what elaborate on what Sam's going on, what's talking about here. So while you're cutting, as you're removing material, you can see those blue lines are created, and those lines, we call those cut history, and it's really valuable to be able to see what you've cut and what you haven't. And in fact, that little eraser button up in the top right hand corner next to the domino, that erases your cut history. So that's kind of a cool little tip if you guys didn't know that. But normally you want to keep that. There are situations where it's valuable to not. But you can see Sam's crossing over a lot of the cuts that he's made here, and the feeling sort of when you're operating Origin is it's quite distinct, knowing when, or feeling rather, when you're in contact with material and when you're not. And it's really easy to overshoot what you're intending to cut if you're not careful. Really, really easy. And if you do end up overshooting, it's quite easy to end up running into something you didn't want to. So keeping track of that cut history, what's been cut, and where your lines intersect one another in these types of sort of inlay, more complex line work type files, it's really good to keep an eye on that. Other kind of fun thing that Sam's going to be showing here is the helix mode. So you can see he's going to set his depth all the way down to 1/2 inch, and because this shape fits directly inside of the corrective range of Origin, Sam doesn't actually have to move around at all. Origin is doing all of this work. Sam just holds it steady, and it's going to drive all the way down to that target depth Sam set of 1/2 inch. And there's not really much you got to do. Just sort of sit back and relax, sip on your lemonade while the machine does the work for you. And it's going to do the same thing here. So you can see helix again. Anytime a shape fits within the corrective range, that little helix option is going to show up. Remember, you can always turn it off, but it's not necessary to do that. If you want a helix, great. But remember that it's there. That the option is there in case it's causing you trouble. So I think now Sam's going to come back through, and you can see that cut history changes based upon the color of the cut history changes based upon the depth that Sam has cut. So you can see the darker lines are at a greater depth. Those are at 1/2 inch, whereas the lighter blue line is still at, where is that, Sam? That's at 1/8.
Test, test, test. Hello. Yeah, no, that's at 1/8. And if you move off your line, that's when you get the accurate representation. The cut channel, that like darker line that shows what is going to be removed, doesn't kind of interfere with your depth information. So you can see exactly what's going on, and then you just roll over and start cutting. One other quick note. What was I going to say? Oh yeah, I'm going to drive a little deeper on this one than I should, perhaps, just to keep the ball rolling. And then another note is the helix mode. You can actually manipulate the kind of rate at which it moves around and plunges down. So you can make a steeper plunging helix by cranking up your auto mode. Like, it'll do less rotations and clear up material sooner. So experiment with that. You know, you might the default might not be optimal for the material you're using. So usually, if it's set correctly for cutting, it'll work well for helixing. But yeah, experiment with that.
Dropping some knowledge on you guys.
Yeah,
Sam knowledge.
Yeah. So 1/4 inch. Actually, we'll go a little deeper. Plus, you can do calculations in here if you're not very good at reality.
I think I'm fine at reality. I'm just bad at math, Sam.
Yeah, some would argue math is reality. Right, yep. I'm about to fire this up and take care of the rest of the online cuts. So these are all 1/8 of an inch, and we're going to 1/2 an inch deep.
All right. So back with you here. So you can see, actually, this is a great view. That overhead view, actually, Goose, is great to show folks. You know, you can actually see the spindle move to track the line that Sam's cutting. So the next time he jumps into a cut here, you can watch. It's plunging now. And if you watch the spindle, which is the kind of square part with the Shaper logo in the middle of it, that's the part that's actually moving independently. So as Sam moves the body of Origin around, the spindle itself is moving around to track. So it's pretty neat to watch that, actually, and you can kind of see how that correlates on screen. It's really evident, most especially when Sam will engage auto mode here when he comes out of the cut. You can see it track. So that's kind of the special sauce that Origin brings to the table here, and that's how you're able to get super accurate cuts done with a handheld router. So once Sam is through with this, we're going to move on to a couple of other steps here. So we're going to look at the resin pour. We're gonna mix up some epoxy and get it poured in there, and look at kind of some of the pitfalls. I think it's a good representation for anyone who's just getting started on resin pours, as we sort of figured this out with you. And then once the pour is done, since we've already got a baked version of it, we're going to wander over to the thickness sander and hopefully do a really cool reveal of the front face of the already completed pour. That's kind of what's left over in the agenda. So stick around, guys. It's going to be fun. Like I said, we're just enjoying ourselves here, and so I hope that you are also enjoying us. And drop comments in the chat. If you like this format, are you interested in watching us muck around in the shop and learn with you? And let us know there. 'Cause I enjoy it, and I think it's probably more informative to some extent. If we learn some lessons and we share those lessons with you, rather than just having the pie completely baked and ready for consumption, with all of the wrinkles worked out. So let us know there. We're always trying to refine sessions and make them better and more interesting and more informative, more valuable to you guys. So yeah, keep the comments coming. We're really excited that this community is developing and that people are really getting into sessions, looking forward to them. And feel free to toss in there as well any topics that you're interested in seeing over the next next months. We're definitely always open to hearing what you're interested in and seeing if we can work that into the schedule. Yeah. And also for those of you joining us, remember every other Thursday we're here, and every Tuesday we are also live at noon Pacific time, and that's Jake. You can join Jake in the shop to see what's been going on at Shaper HQ. You can kind of see little previews of the projects that we're working on for sessions or other little things we've got going on around here, and we'd love to have you come hang out over there as well. Just, you know, the more the merrier. Looks like Sam is... How you doing there, buddy? We got one last cut to do here. All right. Man, that looks so good. It's awesome. Even without the resin in it, that looks great. Let's get Sam's mic back on there, Mr. Goose.
It's off. Wait for that to cool it. A couple of pro tips that I did not follow myself. Once you start cutting here, you'll notice these two strips of tape are pretty much redundant. Your origin is going to be looking at tape way north of this. If I had have peeled these off prior to cutting, I wouldn't have to peel them off every individual little piece here. So that's a good thing to consider. Like all this detail, you know, I didn't have to peel each individual one if I had have got ahead of the ball there. Getting the bottom depth dead right is critical here. Looks good. Yeah, sorry. Do you like the back of my head? Yeah, so that's all good. Some of these, as you round corners, you'll see little slivers. You may not be able to. Can you zoom in crazily, Goose? Or is that max zoom? Okay. So there's just a little bit of cleanup. You know, you want to get rid of some fuzz in some of these as it rounds corners. If I had have had a less sharp and less rigid cutter, these little guys would have chipped out. And there's sort of a delicate balance with, yeah, maybe that'll get us more.
Switched onto the benchtop cam here, Mr. Goose. Yeah, there we go.
So these tiny little details would have been difficult to avoid chipping out. Now this is like really nice cherry. Some other, you know, drier, more crack-prone wood may not have held up as well. So, you know, it's always upsetting when these get sucked up the vacuum, the dust collector. But you know, this here's handled well. And I guess there's a delicate balance between moisture content in your wood. The more moisture in the wood, the more opportunity your resin has to produce bubbles, which, you know, obviously we can resolve that with the shellac, but in this case we're just going to pour it straight in. So it's nice that it's able to resist cracking because it's got a little bit of moisture in it, but we don't want too much if that's going to produce bubbles.
Yeah, and especially if you're working in a more humid environment. You know, if you're working in a humid environment, ideally you'd be able to control that a little bit in your shop. But if you can't, the shellac definitely helps. So creating some kind of moisture barrier between the resin and the you know, wood that you're pouring it into, or whatever material you're pouring it into. The other way to handle that is actually, you know, if you're going to be pigmenting your resin, you can do a clear pour first and just try and get it coated, and essentially do the minimum amount to stop the resin from soaking. So as soon as it sort of starts or stops soaking into the material, rather, that's kind of all you need to do with the clear, and you let that harden up. Once it's hard, you can come back and pour again with your pigmented resin, and hopefully that's sort of doing the same thing as the shellac. But shellac obviously dries a lot faster. The layer is quite a bit thinner, so that's a nice way to get it moving. You're not waiting for the clear resin to set up over multiple days before you can come back and pour in the rest of it.
There's another couple of notes. Like some people at this stage, they're eager to like sand the surface, which I would suggest to avoid the temptation to do that, because just the force of the sandpaper on these little guys will chip them out. And keep in mind also, this is the back face, so it honestly doesn't matter unless you're being extra precious about the inside of your little sign.
You really shot yourself in the foot with that tape there, didn't you?
Yeah,
Sam?
remember that tip? The hindsight wisdom. This will be a good reminder to everyone. Get that off prior to doing a lot of tiny detail cuts. It's especially important with like fine engraving, like woodblock type artwork and stuff.
Yeah.
We produce a lot of little details.
And you know, I'll offer this now that you're down to your last piece, but you know, there is a spatula over here that you could use, Sam.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So with that taken care of, the key thing here is it's very tempting to just start mixing up your epoxy at this point, and you want to get everything dialed because the timer starts ticking when that happens. So yeah, we want to make sure we get the fuzz out. We want to make sure we have a good place to put it once it's done, and all of our pigments need to be ready. And you want to make sure, if you are going to shellac, make sure that you've done that in advance. So I know I had a couple of moments when I was asking Jake, hey, can you just quickly shellac that while I was mixing?
Yeah, this definitely, you know, the Ultra Glow that we're working with has quite a long open time. It's, you know, casting and pouring epoxies tend to have a good long open time. So, but it's always good to, you know, kind of think through every possible step that you know, every possible thing you might need, especially when you're, you know, starting the clock with a hardener or, you know, getting ready for glue up. It's really not all that different. You want to have all your clamps in place and, you know, rags, all of that stuff, have it there, and, you know, mentally walk through the process before you kick off any chemical reactions, just so that you're not running around with your head cut off later.
And you'll notice I didn't take off all the tape. This enables me to potentially do a post operation on this. Like we're not potentially finished here. Let's say I pour in the pigment and it's too opaque. I could, if I set up a little indexing panel here and have my tape remaining on this, I could come back and then use my offsets and cut this wider, deeper after my pigment, my resin is set up. That'll reduce or make it more transparent, or, you know, more light will pass through it. And then I could even do something like, if it gets very thin, I could actually pour in just straight up clear resin to reinforce the back. So, you know, there are some...
I thought you were going to write Sam is the best in the screen afterwards.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that was an option. We were also thinking about putting a little logo in the bottom here. If you just CA glue something in the bottom, pour your resin in, and then when you grind from the other side, it'll be visible on the top. But no, we're not. Cool. I'll just hit it with a little, oh, maybe I won't. We'll call that good and get
you
mixing.
Want the vacuum back?
No.
Stole it.
Yeah, I think it's great, just
Okay.
the way it is. Okay, so Ultra Glow. That's the logo for that. I'd be interested in if anyone's got some good suggestions for alternatives there. We're always interested in trying out a wide range.
Oh, Sam, your mic is sort of taking a walk there.
Oh yeah. Sorry.
Sounding very far away.
Yeah, there we go. Better?
Yep.
So this is ounces. We've got a big one and then two little ones for each of our colored things. We're sort of going to deviate a little bit here in that we'll set up the big pour. Keep in mind these big pockets and wide cuts actually absorb quite a lot of liquid. So we're going to make about 7 ounces of this. And I actually, Noah's got a little, you know, automated stirring device that's really good. But one of the key things to keeping bubbles out, which works pretty well for small batches like this, is avoiding whipping it. If you can, I mean, that device, if you get it fully under the surface, it actually works pretty well. And yeah,
but it does mix in a lot of air. And I think that these really long open time epoxies you can handle that. But it is definitely better if you. I think Jess Crow says mix for 5 minutes. It's really important that this stuff gets thoroughly mixed, because if you don't, it's not going to harden fully. It's gonna
splotchy density.
Yeah, it's not even it's not the density so much as it almost goes gummy. And so it's really critical, most especially for doing something like this, where we're going to be taking the resin to a thicknessing machine later. That it really does harden up like crazy, that it does get to its sort of maximum potential hardness. And if you don't get it mixed up appropriately, it won't. It will stay gummy forever, which is a pain in the ass. Pardon my French live.
Sorry, Mom.
Sorry. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Sam's mom's listening. I'm in trouble now. So anyway, that's really important. So looks like Sam's got his 2 parts mixed in here. And
I was shooting for 7, but we're pretty close to 8 now.
All right. Well, that's okay. That's okay.
How's that?
And he's going to start mixing, and I think that we're probably not going to mix for 5 minutes here.
Yeah, we'll do some TV magic and pretend that we had one prepped earlier.
Yeah.
But the big thing here is to not be like whipping it. So I'm not lifting up and out of the material a bunch.
Maybe you can show us in front of that camera.
Oh yeah, that works better rather than hidden off to the side here.
Yeah.
So you can see there is, you're going to get bubbles in there, but you just don't want a crazy amount of them. If anyone's got some better techniques, by all means, get on the comments and share how you approach this sort of task. Obviously, if you've been missing huge buckets of this stuff for massive table resin pours, you're going to heavily automate it.
Sam, you're missing your gloves here. This is one.
Oh yeah, don't forget your gloves.
Sam does this all the time.
You'll appreciate them at the end of the day, especially when you get into the pigments. So this is an epoxy resin. One of the cool aspects of this, I got a lot of bubbles in here, is one of the cool aspects of this is it doesn't smell horrendous. So some of the other like polyesters and whatnot are really, really brutal, toxic smelling. So I'll give you that for a moment now while I put my gloves on.
I'm gloved up here now. Man, you said don't stir in bubbles, and what you did is stir in all the bubbles, Sam.
So that'll be good for our next phase.
Yeah,
we get to talk about how to fix bubbles,
which is definitely something that people who know how to mix this stuff are very good at not mixing bubbles in. And I think it's something that requires a lot of finesse and feel that neither of us have. But we're here, we're mixing. And that's really all that's important, because once it hardens up, this stuff, and I think most of these casting resins, like I said, have a very long open time. So the good news is that as long as you're not having kind of reactive bubbles with the moisture in your material, the likelihood is that the majority of these bubbles are going to rise up to the top and end up coming out. We hope. That's always a little bit of a risk, but. Throw in your techniques in the comments there so that we can learn a thing or two also. And at this point, Sam's getting out his pigment, and we're going to add that in so that as the final little bit of stirring goes on here, that's getting really well mixed as well.
Yep, you need all these things mixed up well. We'll call that 5 minutes. Sorry to anyone who can actually count.
I want to drip that in there.
Now, in the past, our previous experiments that you saw had way too much. So we're literally, this is quite a big amount of. I'm trying to be careful here. I might actually poke it with something.
Yeah, you need a toothpick.
Yeah. So we're just making sure we don't blurt out. Oh, that's interesting. It's actually sealed over. So this, you probably can't see it. It's got a little, you need to cut it open. So that would have been an eternity before I got anything to come out of that. All right. Now we literally want just one drop. And even that is probably going to get pretty, well, the previous ones we were using got very opaque.
Add a couple more in there.
Yeah, that one's, keep in mind, it's easy to add more it's you're done for if you've added too much. I mean, you could add more epoxy, but you don't want to get it out of sync, with how long it's been mixed or setting up.
It's pretty. It is definitely fairly opaque, but it's really making a big difference. Yeah. Okay, you can probably add a little bit more.
So we had another, this titanium white powder. It was like microscopic amounts seemed to make that go just fully
and I think you
opaque
can
white.
share, the stuff that we bought from Sturgis that we've used in the other two of these actually said there's a very small print on the label said actually not for epoxy resins on it, which seemed like it's set up okay, but we thought we shouldn't share that because it very clearly said to not do exactly what we did. But this is a good thing to pay attention to here because obviously we're adding it very slowly until we get it right. Like Sam said, if you overdo it, you've had it. So we're really looking just to make this cloudy, not necessarily super white, because the light from the LEDs is going to do a lot of the work for us there.
So we don't have a lot of power in terms of light behind this. So this one, don't know if you can see that.
Might even have been a little too dark, yeah.
Is way too dark.
So I think that's probably feeling good, yeah.
Yeah, and you'll see the one, Jake's super successful one, is basically completely translucent. If you can see it in the background, its light passes through that really nicely.
All right. Well, I think that's probably calling it good there, yeah. Do you want to start your pour?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we will. You can either use a syringe, or for some of these bigger areas, I might just kind of spout it in there. Yeah.
See if you can move your hand so that we can see what's going on. So the other trick that I've picked up for not trapping air bubbles in your pour is to always pour into the pool of resin. Never let two or do your best to never let two pools of resin meet one another. That's certainly something that is a necessity in certain places, but as few as you can make, because if two areas of resin are going to sort of come together, they're inherently going to trap air against one another. And so as much as you possibly can, you want to sort of start a pool and then continue to pour into that pool and let the kind of weight of the resin settle itself and push itself outward.
So you can see it sort of flowing around here into all the gaps.
And the good thing and the what's awesome about this technique, and it certainly helps us as a crutch in this particular case. It's okay to be a little messy on this backside because it's not actually the side that's showing. So you can see Sam's actually going to pull a little bit of this resin into a syringe. Hold this for you. For the sake of TV here, we're working on top of our work, which is not really ever a good idea. It's good to have kind of a dirty station with some paper down, In
this case, wax paper is really great, something like that.
But in this case, so that you guys can see what we're doing, we're probably going to be making a little bit more of a mess on top of our material, which in this case is okay. But if you're looking to not make a mess of what you're working on, best case there is to, like I said, make yourself a little epoxy workstation off to the side so that you're not working directly or mixing directly over your project.
And I'm just sort of following that leading edge around. I'm sure everyone will have their own techniques for this sort of thing. And we're expecting it to continue, like the levels are going to drop for a little bit. And if we had that shellac around here, that would guarantee, like if this was a highly pigmented resin, that would prevent it sort of leaching into the grain. I've had a few experiments that were pretty miserable with really black pigments getting drawn into the fibers of the wood, and just it was actually it was a Shaper Hub project, the Crokinole board. I forget who uploaded that one. Awesome game, by the way.
So you just, I mean, like I said, it's okay to be messy on the back of this particular project. If you're really looking to, if this were the front edge, there's all sorts of cool little, I think they're called lure lock tips for syringes. So you can get all sorts of different types of syringes, types of tips for syringes, so that you can really be precise about where you're placing resin. In this particular case, like I said, not really a big deal if we make a mess. The only place where that's really critical that we sort of don't intermingle is in the button colors, so that the clear stays clear and the colored areas do have the right color to them. But yeah, you just sort of can get all sorts of either fine tip syringes or attachments. You can buy them all, medical supply, Amazon, McMaster Carr. There's lots and lots and lots of syringes are a good tool to have in the shop. Good for putting epoxy, controlled amounts of epoxy for glue ups. If you're doing repairs, if you're trying to force glue into an area that's difficult to get into, they're great. They're really, really great tool to have around when the mood strikes.
So you're not going to get it to the right, like it's not going to stay at the intended height if you get it right initially. It's going to be flowing and dropping the whole way around, so don't be too precious initially about getting it up to the right height. But yeah, I'll be really interested to hear everyone's different approaches to these. I want to make sure there's a little bit left over for the button pores. We've got two little containers here that won't take much at all, but yeah, we just want to make sure there's enough to keep us aside. And as we said, this is the back, so we technically don't even need to come all the way to the top if we didn't want it. Like if we were running low, you can just stop whenever you like.
Though the lack of shellac means that it is going to drop down from where we leave it. Yeah.
No.
Yeah, so syringes, most especially if you're talking about using them for glue, it's a one and done kind of thing. There's lots of actually cool for gluing epoxies. There's these cool mixing tips as well, so that you don't have to deal with doing the stirring that you have to do for this pouring resins. Yeah, it's kind of a one-time use thing. They're pretty cheap, and like I said, I don't always use them, and I don't always reach for them when I'm working with this kind of stuff. But having them around is great, and they can really get you out of a bind.
So yeah. I'll let you go with those other little guys.
Sure.
I'll finish this up.
Okay. Is that I can steal some of this stuff?
Yeah, no, I think we'll finish this.
And how much were you using on these guys?
It's about like halfway.
Okay.
And then I think it's 4 drops per.
Okay, so I'm gonna just pour out. It's okay to in this case, since we're adding colors, we have this white pigment, or kind of pearlescent white. It's all right to add dyes to them and kind of mix the colors that you're looking for. So nice to not have to throw out this resin as well. Good to just use it up as much as we can. Does that look about right too, Sam?
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
What did you say?
4 drops per was what had worked out pretty well in the past.
Okay. So don't screw this up. 1, 2. Oh, kind of do this off camera here. I actually don't want to pour the dye over this.
Yeah. It's a bit brutal.
3.
So that dye is
4.
Even more viscous than the resin, so it'll soak into this pretty aggressively. Which, once again, is the back, not the end of the world, but then I'll start.
And this dye stuff really is a place where you want to have gloves on, because it will dye your skin. All sorts of neat colors.
Don't know if those colors are coming through all right, are they, Goose? Pretty punchy stuff. Once again, it's beneficial to stir a lot here, more than you would anticipate, trying to get into all the corners. and I'm trying to avoid too much air in here, but as you can see, actually it's probably worth looking on the main one. You can see around the edge where it's exposed to moisture and the grain, there are those tiny little bubbles appearing, and we'll walk through some of the steps to solving that in a second. Things aren't like, I made it sound like everything's super rushed at this stage. You know, this is not going to set up crazy quickly. The temperature will have an impact, so if you're in a warm environment, that'll make it flow better, and will actually make it set up quicker as well.
Okay, so I think we're here. We've got our green and orange both mixed up. You can see.
You can get us that other view, Goose. There we go.
You can see that guy's the orange, that guy's the green. Again, we're going for translucency here so that we can pass light through from the backside. So we're not trying to make these opaque. We're just sort of trying to tint the resin so that we get the kind of desired color. When you're going opaque, it's a lot easier to kind of have more control over the color that you're using. At least in our experience here, when you're doing the kind of translucent resin, you're more at the mercy of the dyes that you have. So you want to make sure you have a good amount of those colors on hand. You can mix them, but it's a lot more challenging than if you say have like a white base that you're mixing into.
Magic.
Yeah.
One other quick note, we've made it previously. We are reversed now. We're looking at the back. So remember, our green to go button is on the right from the other side. So we're going to put it on the left. So we'll lay these out.
Yeah. Don't tell Sammy did it backwards until later.
Yeah. Surprise. I'm just going to pour this in.
Sam's gotten good at that.
Absolutely nailed it. And then we'll do one more here. Usually you want to do this on your own late at night when no one's watching.
Yeah, good thing everyone's watching right now,
Yeah,
Sam.
yeah. So that'll be
pressure.
fine, I think.
Yeah, definitely better to under pour than over. As I discovered on my first one here, I got a little bit of a mixy scramble thing going on when the colors bled into one another.
Yeah, because the resin's the same, whatever, surface tension or something, if it touches the other resin, it gets drawn into it very aggressively and will sort of spread out, and
which can be quite cool if that's the effect that you're going after.
Yeah.
I think a lot of looking at Jess Crow's work and mixing to make things look like water at the beach, at the sand. That kind of stuff's really cool, really interesting to play with. In this particular case, we wanted very distinct colors to represent the buttons of origin in this.
So now
design.
we're going to look at, we'll try not to punish this. This is map gas, which is overkill. This is like a really hot burning gas, but we're after just a little bit of heat and a little bit of CO2.
A little creme brulee torch is nice here so that it's not quite as intense, but this is what we have on hand.
Some people use the CO2 in their breath to just kind of breathe on the surface. I'll see if it works here. So you can see the bubbles popping as I breathe on it. We're going to speed things up a bit with this bad boy. Obviously, there's a lot of volatile things around here, so we don't want to get too much heat in there.
If anyone can, I don't know how visible that is, but man, it's really quite striking how effective this can be. But you're gonna see bubbles start to come back, right? Reacting with the moisture, or bubbles that were trapped in the resin that are making their way to the surface. Yeah. So Sam's got a hammer here, a way to essentially agitate, just similar to when you're pouring concrete and you use a tool to vibrate air bubbles out. Same concept here. There's air that's trapped inside of the resin, and ideally, it's not hardening up in there. It looks pretty clear though, man.
Yeah, it's not too bad.
Good.
I do expect there to be a few bubbles just along that interface between the wood and the resin.
Yep. And so you can kind of keep the torch around as this starts to harden. If you're around the shop while it's going, you can poke your head back in while it's still quite liquid. You can use this torch trick. As soon as it really starts to kind of gum up, though, that's it. The die is cast. and it is what it is. But
So we can see a few more accumulating here. Basically, for 5 minutes or so, you would just keep an eye on it and sort of play whack-a-mole with bubbles as they come to the surface. And like a nice hot environment. Some people even heat up their...
You've lost your mic again.
Oh, impressive. Some people... Sorry.
Sam's having some wardrobe malfunctions today. It's because he didn't wear the headband. I kept telling him he's got to put the headband on.
They'll keep coming to the surface, but after 5 minutes or so, this is going to start to get solid. So no amount of heat on the surface is going to have any impact on any bubbles below. So just keep it moving a little bit. Give them a chance to come up. Right, we're going to try and get a reveal.
Yeah, jump over here. So this is the turkey coming out of the oven here. This is what it will look like when it's dry. Keeping in mind that we did pigment this down quite a bit more than our version that we're doing here. But I think that'll actually show...
The opacity doesn't change much at all as it hardens.
Yep. Yeah, so it is. This is going to be quite clear, and this is going to be kind of milkier. But the effect, since we're using kind of lower power LEDs in this sign, I think is going to be more effective with this clear that's just a little tinted. But yeah, join me over at the thickness sander here. I'm gonna wander my way over and see into the shop here. I know, coming out of the session studio. Unheard of. Anyway, for those of you guys that aren't familiar with what's going on here, I don't know if it's easy to see. This is a pretty inexpensive thickness sander that's essentially just got a drum throughout this case, and that drum has sandpaper that's wrapped around it in a helix, and it works, not unlike a planer or any kind of other thicknessing machine. Only what it's doing to remove the material is with sandpaper rather than with knives. So, but these guys are great for kind of more kind of hobby level shops. You can get into the really crazy belt style thickness sanders and more commercial shops that are totally nuts, totally awesome, and totally expensive. So these are really more approachable way to do this type of work. I wouldn't recommend necessarily doing this in a planer. It would probably work okay, but you run the risk of, if your resin isn't hardened all the way through, gumming up your planer, which, in this case, if we gum up the sandpaper on this, no big deal. We just change it. It's pretty easy to come back from that mistake. Drum sanders are also great for ingrain. So if you're thicknessing ingrain cutting boards, you don't want to run ingrain through a planer, but you can with a thickness sander. So that's kind of a fun. They're a little bit less common of a shop tool, so I just thought we'd take a moment there to talk through it. Anybody have any questions on thickness sanders? You can toss them in the chat. I'm going to turn the belt drive on, the drum on, and our dust collection. It's going to get a little noisy here, and we're just going to get going. I don't know if my mic is hot. Is my mic still hot, Goose? Okay. Hopefully it's not too loud. You guys can hear what's going on and see what's going on. Goose, let me know if I need to adjust the camera or anything that I'm doing so that this is really good and visible. Okay, so I'm just going to make little micro adjustments here, and I had this down to about, I believe, right about 0.6 of an inch in thickness before we started here. So we're just going to work our way down until we start to see the resin reveal. And that should be right around at a ½ inch in thickness. So I'm just going to grab my handy dandy set of calipers over here, which are not so handy dandy apparently. Sam, would you mind grabbing me a set of calipers?
Certainly.
And I just want a generally good idea to keep an eye on where your thicknesses are, just so that you can sort of have a good expectation of what's going on. Sir? So, just in the same way as a planer, you're making tiny adjustments. We're not removing a whole lot of material at a time, about a 64th of an inch at a time, each one of these passes. So it might take us a minute to get through here, but it's good to be slow and steady in winning the race here rather than going too hard, potentially heating up and gumming up the resin. There's a lot of heat generated here, so going slower is better than going faster in this particular instance. Still looking good out there, Goose? All right. So like I said, I didn't want to spoil the surprise here, so I didn't want to go too deep getting this piece of material ready. So hopefully you guys can bear with us while we make this happen. I'm going to check the thickness as soon as it comes out of this pass. We'll see where we're at. This is the magic of live sessions, guys. We're here together, we're hanging out in the shop. It's great. Okay, we're getting really close. So this is now at I don't know if you can see. We're right around 0.53 inches. So we've got about a 1/16 of an inch to go before we start seeing resin. Actually, one thing that's good here that I may have not been doing, these drum style sanders that are just held from one side tend to be a little bit uneven in how they remove material. So it's actually good practice to continually reverse your piece so that you're kind of it's out by a really minor amount, but you'll start to see as the resin is revealed here, you will start to see one side show up first, the side that's closer to the motor and the support armature. Where are we at here? Yeah, coming along. Should have removed a little bit more material, apparently. Okay, the weighting is what makes the final little bit more exciting. You guys can see there's really no practical reason not to get the depth of your resin pour a little bit closer to the material thickness. I think I start to see some something coming through here, because the more or the less material that you have to remove, the easier time you're going to have. Yeah, we're almost there. We've got a Super Max drum sander here. I think that they're essentially a Laguna brand now. Yeah, we generally like it. It's gets the job done. But yeah, do your homework out there. This one's cool because it can do it's a 16-inch wide drum, but it's open on one end, which, like I said, has some downfalls, right? It's not as well supported, so you end up with a slightly crooked cut off the drum. But you can actually do double the width of the drum because you can flip it around. So they call it a 1630. And here we go. Okay, I'll shut up about the machine. You guys can see we're actually starting. Can you see that, Goose? Okay, we're actually starting to see a little bit of resin pop through here, guys. So hopefully you guys can see that. And we're going to keep at it until it reveals. Yeah, there it goes. There it goes. Okay. This is my favorite part. I love this part of the process. So we can start to see the outline really showing through here. Sorry, down here. And we're going to keep at it. Right, look at that. Oh, that looks awesome. So you can see it's not really doing nearly as much of the kind of shadowing that that we saw on the plywood. The lines are quite a bit more crisp on the edge, and those will become a little bit more crisp. But there is a little bit of soak through, so that shellac would have been a good thing on this for sure. You can see there. So I'm going to take one more pass through, I think, but we're more or less there. And then obviously, in order to get Jake's filming sign, that was sanded through a series of grits all the way down to 1,000. So really fine on the finish for that guy. And the intention there being that we wanted we wanted those letters to be more or less translucent. So the finer you go with the sandpaper, the more the light will show through, the less the light will be diffused. So I think we're there. We'll bring this back over to the studio so that we can take a look at it with a little bit more detail. Okay. Let's take a peek here on this camera, or maybe the overhead. You guys can see. And that looks cool. Okay. So let's see. Sam, have you got that light?
Yeah, I'll just go grab it.
So we could just pop a light behind this guy and see what it looks like, but I'd say that's pretty successful. Let's see, maybe pull this off. So you can see if we get a box behind it. Let's see, I don't know how much that's really going to show on camera. Maybe here? On the bench top, Goose? Yeah, there you go. That's better. So it's really going to blow this guy out. But you can see when we get this box set up appropriately that this will be passing light through pretty well. It's, you know, at present quite opaque because it's at a coarse level of sand off of the thickness sander. So we would obviously need to come through with an orbital sander and really, you know, work this down to a finer level of finish. But I think this is going to look great, man.
Did you test the green and the orange buttons?
Green and orange. So those are not really showing through that much. The orange a little bit, the green definitely less.
And then if we look, make sure others can see.
Yeah.
So you'll notice, looks like there's a bit of bleed there, right? And then
yeah, it could have bled through. Yeah, potentially.
And then the narrow lines let less light through than the large pocketed areas.
Yeah, trying to not get resin on this here. Let's see if we do this. How can we do this better?
For the above one. Oh yeah. That better?
Okay.
So you can see the lines, because they're such narrow kind of channels. There's a lot of the light being absorbed, bouncing off the sides, and only the stuff that's going dead straight forward comes out. Whereas the big pocketed areas kind of have a bit of scattering within them.
It's a pretty actually interesting little bit of physics here too, because this LED is actually a color mixing LED, so you can see some of the colors showing through. But right there you can see, you know, that's kind of the idea that we're going for here, is very, you know, bright white in these areas. So. I think that the clearer resin that we did in this next pour today is going to actually do us quite a bit more favors on that front.
And that one's not dead in the water. As we said, you could, Goose, if we can go back to my screen, as an option, you could come in with Origin and pocket out a big area on the back, if that makes sense. And if it got so thin that things were starting to get sort of flexy and you were losing your stability, you could then just refill that with clear epoxy to bind it all together and up the strength of the whole thing, whilst enabling light to pass through much better. So yeah, that's just, I mean, we're always interested in what you can do midway through a project, not so much, oh yeah, there we go.
Backlit resin fill sign, what it said on the box. So we're going to get this finished up and get it backlit properly, and we'll make sure to share photos of it up on social, so keep an eye out for that.
I think with a bit of finish on it and everything, it'll look pretty classy.
Yeah. Jake's got a new desk ornament, I think.
Yeah, we accumulate them, and this one we'll keep, you know, hitting for another couple of minutes. Hopefully I wasn't making a racket in the background while you guys were sanding.
No, all good.
But yeah, I've got another couple of little bubbles to take care of, and then we're good to go.
All right. Well, I think probably at this point we should go ahead and sign off. Thank you very much for joining us today. It's been a pleasure tinkering in the shop with you. Hope you guys enjoyed it. See you guys later.
Thank you all.